Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, my fine friends. Welcome to the 11th episode of the 11th season of the Tom Petty Project podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Brown. This is the weekly podcast that digs into the entire Tom Petty catalogue, song by song, album by album, and includes conversations with musicians, fans, and people connected with Tom along the way. I don't really have any tea to spill this week, folks. Nothing massively important happening in my world. I did pick up some sweet deals on vinyl this past weekend, including Chris Christopherson's debut record, a live Glenn Campbell double album from the Royal Festival Hall, and Billy Joel's excellent The Innocent Man. But it was a fairly busy weekend with some work I had to finish up. So let's jump straight over to social media and see what people had to say about Climb That Hill. On Facebook, regular contributor Nora Hayward Olson commented, "Enjoyed the pod as always." Thanks, Nora. And this week I was glad for the brevity. Due to my work, it's my busy season. I like the theme of this song. Life doesn't always work out how you want it to, but we can't go forward unless we stand up, dust ourselves off, and take the first steps towards that hill climb again. And I've had a couple of people say that they're enjoying going back to the more concise episodes. And look, I really, really enjoyed doing the Wildflowers season, but it did take a lot of time to pull all those additional conversations together. So I can't really see me doing another season like that, or in that format. So I guess what I'm saying is you're all reprieved. Back to 20-ish minutes of me, and I think that's probably enough to last anyone a week, isn't it? My executive producer, Paul Roberts, responded, "Great pod, Kev." Thanks, Paul. Loving the deep dive into this neglected, forgotten area of Tom's discography. Like yourself, I'm a late adopter of Tom and ignored it completely outside of Walls and Angel Dream. Never a lover of soundtracks, as in my experience, the artist tends to donate something substandard. I only returned to these songs in earnest with the release of the Angel Dream CD. And that's always a challenge, isn't it, with soundtrack albums? And I would say that actually probably most of my favorite soundtrack records are instrumental. And I think of, Mark Knopfler's outstanding compositions on the Princess Bride soundtrack, or Peter Gabriel's amazing soundtrack for The Last Temptation of Christ. But I was also chatting with someone recently about how good Phil Collins' soundtrack is for the Disney movie Tarzan. I know it's a kids' movie, and I know that it's songs written for a kids' movie, but they really are superb. And You'll Be in My Heart, I will stand by this. I think is a fantastic song. Anyway, it's a hard thing to pull off. And in the case of this season's album, we obviously know that it was an eclectic mix of dusted off Wildflower songs and odds and ends that were written around this time, as well as songs that were written specifically for the movie. So I hear you, Paul. Dana Strode very gently corrected me on a mistake I made on the lyrics to this one, writing, "This post had me doing a double take. Part of the lyrics you posted are not what I ever heard, so poked around and found this image for you." And this should attach an image. It's labeled official for what it's worth. And I bet you'll agree the small difference is largely more Tom Petty-esque. So tempers flare and words are spoken. You close one door, another opens. You hear the music and you wander in. And I think I said that, and you're wondering, which I don't know how I didn't catch that. That's really weird that I didn't catch that. Usually I'm reading along the lyrics on YouTube Music as I'm doing my sort of listen through and making all my notes and whatnot. But I almost always go back to the official lyrics too. So like I said, I don't know how I missed that one. So a massive thanks to Dana for correcting that. She finishes off by saying, "It's very resolute. He hears music through an open door and follows it. It cures all ills, inspires new motivation and inspiration. He walks away from conflict and finds solace in music." And I love this interpretation of the lyric. It almost brings to mind the end of Out in the Cold. What's in here? Oh, it's kind of almost like that kind of thing. My pal Steve Urshel had this to say over on Blue Sky. "It's a good song, but it leaves a slight feeling of unfulfilled potential for me. When it starts and the vocals kick in alongside the riff, it sounds like it could be a classic. Doesn't quite reach those heights, but there's still plenty here to enjoy." And you know what, Steve? I think I generally agree with this. It's a really good song. It's not necessarily in Tom's list of great songs, but, that's okay too. Not many people could knock it clean out of the park as often as Tom did. So a song that you can say is really good, it's just fine now and again. And it's just a good album track. Okay, that's social media pretty much largely wrapped up. So why don't we jump into this week's song, which is the Heartbreakers cover of Lucinda Williams' 1989 single, Change the Locks. Okay, the first thing to note about this one is the very slight change in the title. Lucinda Williams' version is titled Changed the Locks, where the Heartbreakers version is titled Change the Locks. It's a little similar bit of improv that they did on Feel a Whole Lot Better by dropping the word I'll feel a whole, so it's not I'll feel a whole lot better, it's just feel a whole lot better and dropping that word off the front. So I was actually kind of wondering today whether there's some strange industry or rule or mechanism that makes some parts of publishing easier if you monkey with the title slightly. I'm not too sure whether it just shows up differently if you search for one versus the other. Well, I'm said this predates Google, so that's probably not it. So maybe Tom didn't know the title was changed instead of change, but I don't know. That seems unlikely because he was a student of music. So I suspect that he just preferred the way it looked and the way it scanned as changed the locks instead of changed the locks. And I love the story that Lucinda tells about Tom when she opened for the Heartbreakers during the 90s. In an interview with The Guardian, she said, "He took me on tour with him, and the audiences didn't know me, and people would be sitting there with their arms folded waiting for Tom. Tom saw this happening, so one night he came out on stage, took the mic, and said, 'I want you to listen to this next artist because she's really good. You need to pay attention.' It was just so heartwarming and moving because nobody ever does that. I had no idea he was going to do it, and it says everything about him as a person." And if you look at the list of artists Tom chose to cover, it's a venerable collection of musical legends, and the list of artists he decided to cover on record is very, very small. So the fact that Lucinda Williams was one of that exclusive cohort says a lot about Tom's opinion of her as a songwriter. This respect is very much reciprocated, and Linda released her tribute album to Tom, Running Down a Dream, in 2021. And if you haven't listened to that record, you really, really ought to. It's terrific. For those of you who've never dived into Lucinda Williams' catalogue, Change the Locks was her first charting single. I think reached number 16 on the mainstream rock chart. Didn't hit the sort of the Billboard. Because you know what? Rock music from very strong female characters didn't tend to in those days. The self-titled third album it was taken from is considered by many critics to be one of the seminal albums in the development of the Americana genre that gained momentum in the mid to late 90s as a pushback against the mainstream Nashville pop country sound typified by the likes of Garth Brooks and Shania Twain. And this is in a similar way that outlaw country pushed back, 20 years earlier. And it's fair to say that Lucinda is an icon among alt country songwriters, particularly female songwriters, and her distinctive voice and heartfelt approach to writing songs runs an easy parallel with Tom's sensibilities. So you can see why this one would have appealed to Tom as a song to cover. The song kicks off with that twin distorted guitar attack, drums and bass. And immediately you can hear that this is not a straight cover of the original, but a real interpretation of the song. The core riff isn't changed, so to speak, but it is played in a lower key, which gives it an immediately heavier tone. It's also slightly faster, and without the more country-esque instrumentation, it feels a lot more blues rock than alt country. And that's not a knock against the original either, by the way, which is absolutely superb, but it serves to highlight what I enjoy hearing in a cover. I always think it's important to find the bones of a song, but not dress it in exactly the same clothes. Otherwise, just go listen to the original. It's why I prefer Something in the Air over Feel a Whole Lot Better of Tom's covers. The switch to a really straight backbeat adds a further different type of grit to the song, as does the addition of an alternating octave guitar transition into the first verse. This little lick begins after a 2-beat bar to just throw the time off a little. Well, it's 2 beats if you count the song at halftime instead of full time. I think it's about 76 beats per minute. That's how I'm counting it. The section I'm talking about is the one you hear at the end of the first verse where Tom sings, "I changed the lock on my front door." And that last word, door, punches into that little transitionary lick, which isn't in the original and is instead, in the original, filled by a harmonica. The guitar playing there gives the song a little more punch into the rock sphere again rather than the country one. During the verse, the two guitars are playing very different parts. The left channel is playing the 2 open chords, D and G, with a nice clean distortion, just nice open ringing chords, while the dirty fuzz in the part in the right channel is playing chunky staccato stabs and some single notes and a couple of double notes. There's also a really nice light touch on the digital piano too, which I never noticed before sort of digging in for this episode, and it's just playing that descending pattern with a very slight tremolo applied. After 3 verses, we get that fantastic heavy riff coming in again on the back of Tom saying, "Look out," and some screeching guitar accents added in a couple of places before we head into the next pair of verses. These verses here, Ben Mont's organ part coming in, run through the Leslie rotary speaker with yet more distortion, adding some grit and grease to the part. There's a nice, interesting pattern to the structure of this song that I'll talk about a little bit later. But if I say that after 2 more verses, we go back into that howling riff again, with Tom vamping over the first couple of bars with some exclamations that I can't quite discern, I don't know, maybe you can see the pattern that I'm talking about. After that first pass through this riff, The snare switches to playing on every beat. And there's no solo here, just that instrumental portion that is punctuated by Tom's howls and exclamations. We then have a dropout with Kurt Biscara moving to just delicate taps on the ride cymbal to keep time. And as the next verse begins, that drum part has some kick accents added into a slightly loose hat. So we move away from the straight backbeat. The guitar in the left channel is still playing those open alternating chords, but the right channel is really heavily palm muted and playing a more percussive than the straight rhythm part. After this last verse, we don't get the immediate push back into the main riff, but instead have that right channel guitar playing a little, it's almost like a doorbell-esque two-note phrase over top of some root notes. It gives a wonderful space and lightness to this section to contrast against the weight and heaviness of what has come before. Okay, folks, it's time for this week's Petty Trivia. Your question from last week was this. The Orange Wisp variant of the recent Gennaro Tapes Live in Edinburgh release was exclusively released via which outlet? Was it A, select independent record stores, B, the online Tom Petty store, C, Third Man Records, or D, Amazon? Okay, well, the online Tom Petty store version was in turquoise, or as Billy Connolly pronounced it, turquoise, which I quite like, vinyl, and sold out in, I think it was a couple of days that one sold out. The Third Man Records release was printed on maroon reverse splatter, and I'm not 100% sure, but I think that Third Man, so that's Jack White from the White Stripes, it's his record pressing plant, and I think that they actually pressed all the vinyl for this release. They just had the exclusive on that variant. Thankfully, the record wasn't sold or shipped through Amazon, as if you listen to the podcast all the way to the end each week, you'll know my thoughts on supporting huge corporations versus indie record sellers, which means that the answer is A. That's right, my beloved indie record stores were the ones that were given the opportunity to bring in the Orange Wisp variant. Now, as I said last week, I didn't actually order this one due to other priority records on my shopping list, but years down the road, there's a really good chance that I'll pay 3 to 4 times the sticker price for a copy, because that's what us vinyl nerds do. And speaking of vinyl nerds, I did pick up a very good album today that my local indie store brought in for me. It's an album by a British band called Pulp, who were formed in the early 80s, but didn't really hit the big time until this album came out, which I think it was 95, 96, when the song Common People hit number 2 on the UK chart. That song is, in my opinion, the best track that Ray Davies of the Kinks never wrote. And many artists have been tagged with the label, the next Ray Davies, but Jarvis Cocker is the only writer I ever thought of as getting close to him. If you've never checked out the album, do give it a spin. It is fantastic. And maybe I'll leave a link to Common People in the episode notes. Do check that song out. It's one of my favorites. Okay, enough digression into Pulp and Jarvis Cocker and the Kinks. Your question for this week is this. What position did Wall's Circus reach on the Canadian music charts? Was it A, number 1, B, number 2, C, number 3, or D, number 17? Okay, back to the song. I mentioned the song structure of this one is kind of neat. To start with, we don't really have a chorus. We have that tagline at the end of each verse, which is just a repeat of the first line, but without the qualifying clause following it. And what I mean by that is, the first line of the first verse is, I changed the lock on my front door so you can't see me anymore. So we're given the reason why the lock was changed. The last line is simply, I changed the lock on my front door. And there's such a strong, forceful finality to the way that that's structured. It brooks no argument and no debate. I'm telling you why I've done this. I'm restating it as an emphatic declaration to close this verse. And each verse follows this structure. I changed the number on my phone so you can't call me up at home. I changed the kind of car I drive so you can't see me when I go by. I changed the kind of clothes I wear so you can't find me anywhere. And these first 4 statements are very practically focused and very pointed details of, protecting oneself or insulating oneself against harm. The last 2, however, get broader. I changed the tracks underneath the train so you can't find me ever again, which is such a great metaphor for changing the direction of your life or the path that you're on. And then we close with, I changed the name of this town so you can't follow me down. And I love this particular line. It's my favorite line in the song because it's suggestive of a real fierce unwillingness to relent. I'll change the name of the whole damn town if I need to stop you from bothering me. It's a damn fine piece of songwriting, and it's very similar to the way that Tom will blend the specific and the more abstract or unusual in the same song. Those verses are capped by that restatement of the first line as a refrain, and Tom adding in that alternating crunchy riff gives it a grounding that almost makes that last line and then that riff acts as an instrumental chorus. The other thing to notice is that the verses are organized in descending fashion. 3 verses, instrumental section, 2 verses, instrumental, 1 verse, instrumental. No bridge, and again, no specific chorus. And I also think that this structure is used deliberately by Williams to not let the object of her ire off the hook. Her declarations and her resistance is relentless and absolute. Once we get this dropout, we then get an unusual motif where the first line of each verse is restated, or the last line if you like. It's almost like a laundry list to check off, and it's all performed over the top of those stripped back, elegant guitar lines. This is where the song ends in its original form, but after the last 3 declarations of I changed the name of this town, I changed the name of this town, I changed the name of this town, which acts as a huge, glorious middle finger to the antagonist of this piece, by the way, Tom howls us back into that main riff for the outro in this version. And through this section, he repeats, "You know that's right," with a very McCartney-esque high register, kind of pinched aggression. Through the last few bars, there's a very sneaky little bit of lead guitar that's mixed in quite low, and then there's an extra chord after the last kick cymbal, which gives that ending it gives it a really live feel. Like Mike in the left channel didn't know that Kurt was going to end there and played past the end of the song in a very spontaneous way. There's then a bit of a hang and some, sort of fret noise and a big messy crash ending, which I really, really enjoy. Okay, Pennyheads, that's it for this week. So first of all, Change the Locks by Lucinda Williams is a fantastic song, and her delivery of it is sublime and very intimate in a different way. The deliveries are much, much different to the way that Tom does. And it's a tone that's enhanced by the arrangement that is used on that original recording. The Heartbreakers amp up the anger by speeding the track up slightly, making the guitar tones heavier and adding in that extra guitar phrase. So you have an interesting original song with a cool, atypical song structure interpreted in a raucous, noisy way by members of the opposite sex in a different musical genre. It's one of those covers that adds to the original and makes it feel unique and authentic to the person who's covering it. It's a very simple song musically, and the theme is well-trodden ground, but the way all of it is packaged and delivered really works for me. So for all these reasons, and this might surprise a few people, I don't know, I'm going to give Change the Locks an 8 out of 10. The Tom Petty Project is a proud member of the Deep Dive Podcast Network. Go check us out at deepdivepodcastnetwork.com. Lots of good shows there. I'm sure you would find something you like. Check out my other shows, Seaside Pod Review, a Queen podcast that I do with my bestie, Randy Woods. And also check out the Ultimate Catalog Clash that I co-host with my great pal, Corey Morissette. We just wrapped up Dire Straits. This week's episode was a conversation about Dire Straits' live albums that we had with a wonderful, wonderful Australian named Michael Smith, who we met through my Queen podcast. Great guy. And a great chat. Don't forget to follow me on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and YouTube at The Tom Petty Project, and on Blue Sky at Tom Petty Project. Go follow, like, subscribe, do all those things, and do leave ratings if you can, if you have time. Keep talking to me on social media, and I will keep reading out your comments on the show. And as a weekly reminder, The Tom Petty Project is not affiliated with the Tom Petty Estate in any way. So when you're looking for Tom's music, do visit official streaming platforms and go to your local independent record seller. Go grab some media. Go support local business. I'm going to keep telling you this every week until you do it. When you're looking for official merchandise, go to store.tompetty.com. And if you're looking for merch for this show, you can go to store.tompettyproject.com. Don't forget to check out the Tom Petty Nation and Tom Petty Fans Forever groups on Facebook, and go check out Channel 31 on SiriusXM, which is Tom Petty Radio. Until we meet again next week, keep listening to and sharing Tom's music. Try to be kind. Try to say I love you to someone at least once a day. Stay safe and healthy, and I'll be back with you next week to talk about the first song Tom wrote for Dana. Angel Dream, in this case, number 4. Bye-bye.